the Trillion Trees podcast hosted by Saad Al. Join the movement. 1 trillion trees by 2030. Tune in for inspiring stories, groundbreaking ideas, and real solutions to tackle climate change. Listen to it. Watch every Saturday, 4 p.m. Make an impact now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Trillion Tree podcast. Today is a very, very special episode for me. We're joined by someone who has worked directly in climate and not just work as in run a company or um, run those operations that we usually cater to or hear stories of, but worked in shaping policies backed by science and actually worked on implementation at scale. Today we're joined by James Palmer, who is the former Secretary of Environment in New Zealand. He's currently the Chief Executive at the Earth Science New Zealand.
Thanks, Saad. Thanks for having me on board. Never miss an opportunity to talk about the climate challenge and what we can be doing all more to encourage greater investment in nature-based solutions, which I know is a particular area of interest for you. So I've done a little bit of research around trillion trees and inspired by the aspiration you have and the focus on high integrity, ecologically high integrity solutions to the climate challenge. So yeah, really keen to talk about those today.
Thank you so much. I'd really like to kick it off by learning about you and how your journey started. Have you always been in New Zealand? Where did you grow up? Just to learn more about, on a personal level, about you.
Thanks, Saad. So I've born and raised in New Zealand, and I grew up in a horticultural and agricultural landscape. And it wasn't really until my teenage years that I discovered there was this other side to New Zealand that was around towering mountains and untouched virgin rainforests and rivers and lakes that predominantly sit in the South Island in New Zealand. I grew up in the North Island. And it was during that time that I became particularly interested in the global environmental crises and issues around particularly deforestation. I had an older sister who was an activist in those areas internationally. And as I came to get to know our untouched environments, I came to understand how significantly modified much of New Zealand has been in a relatively short period of time. New Zealand was the last major landmass to be colonized on the planet, and it has unique flora and fauna that has arisen from its isolation from most of the rest of the world for most of human history. And that relatively recent colonization process resulted in some very significant environmental change over a short period of time. So as I learned about that, I discovered what we once had, what we lost, the environmental cost of our economy, our primary production economy, on which New Zealand's developed world status was very much built during the 20th century. And during that time, I became familiar with old growth native forest logging operations that the government was still carrying out in my early university years. And I spent a time being involved as a native forest activist and really came to understand the difficult trade-offs around a country in transition from its past practices to ones that would be more sustainable over time, and the political and socioeconomic challenges associated with that. And so my university studies were very much around those challenges, and I was fortunate to have my early work in the political environment, working for a government minister on climate-related issues and environmental issues more broadly. And I have, over the last 25 years, been involved in climate policy in a range of different ways, as a political advisor, as a director of strategy within our Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and more latterly our Ministry for Primary Industries, at our Environment Ministry. And I spent a time in regional government as a CEO overseeing natural resource management in my home region. And then in 2022 was appointed as Secretary for the Environment and went back to central government and had 3 years in that role. And then, as you said before, most latterly and recently, I've joined Earth Sciences New Zealand as their first permanent chief executive. It's a new organisation that's bringing together all of our earth science capability across climate, freshwater, marine, and our earth sciences into a fully integrated earth science institution for New Zealand, and also for international science and research collaborations. So for me, I've been around the policy cycle, from being at the political end to being an independent or apolitical policy advisor to successive governments, then working in the implementation both at national and regional scale, including on things like afforestation for carbon sequestration and forest restoration, and then now background into the science end of the system. And I guess, that experience has taken me through different political cycles, economic cycles, and many of the issues that I started working on in my career are still with us, of course, and we're making progress, but we've still got many challenges ahead. So keen to talk about those, Saad.
Thank you again. That is really inspiring and interesting to see how you actually ended up with policy making, and how you work your way up. You started this 25 years ago. That's that's a year longer than how old I am. Um, I had one question that had always interested me, because I was always been a puzzle. What do people misunderstand about how climate decisions are actually made? Like, who really makes them? Is there more politics within it, or is there more science? What's real? What's just a public narrative? And lastly, how is it different in various countries? If you have had experience, maybe communicating with different ministers in other countries, because I'm just really trying to connect angles, having traveled in many countries myself, and I was recently in Davos. I got to meet many ministers, different angles from every single one. Discussion has really puzzled me. If you allow me to ask this.
For sure. So, look, climate is extraordinarily difficult as a public policy set of challenges, precisely because it is a global issue affecting the global commons, and yet the levers at our disposal and our policy responses are typically national responses within national governments, and national governments have to respond to the will of their people, whether they're democratic systems or otherwise. And the self-interest, if you like, of the nation state comes up against the commitments globally and the collective action challenge that we all have. I think it's fair to say that every country sees its climate response through defensive economic interests, and they're both on the adaptation side, damage to crops, infrastructure, industry, but also the impairment to other industries that might not be able to prosper, trade, and grow in a carbon-constrained world. And so but countries tend to come to the table quite defensively. And I've always been a bit surprised that the multilateral processes under the United Nations Framework Convention do have so much individual self-interest from individual nation states coming forward. But if you understand the political drivers on the ministers and the decision makers, you understand the pressure that they're under by their domestic audiences. Domestic populations are typically balancing the many other things that we all balance in our households around the cost of living and jobs and employment and economic growth and development. And those considerations are often more short term, whereas climate effects are ongoing and longer term, and the adaptation challenge is longer term. So I tend to think that climate's very similar to public health issues, where often you're trading off short term versus long term, and the ability for our democracies in particular to make long term decisions that are in the interests of all of humanity is quite constrained. So certainly here in New Zealand, and this is what I've observed as I've travelled around the world and engaged with other governments, is that climate policy decision making is typically made alongside broader economic strategy questions. And while science is a useful input into that, the real issues are economic and financial ones. And I think where we've been able to make some really good gains have been where you've got win-wins between economic development imperatives, whether it be in green energy or whether it be in energy efficient appliances or products, where there are win-wins for consumers, win-wins for governments, as well as for the climate. That's the low-hanging fruit, and I guess that's largely where we've been able to make progress. It's where those bigger trade-offs lie, that industries need to be decarbonised or ultimately retired as industries, that the politics gets much more challenging. And obviously for coal and oil and gas, that's been an issue in many countries. So politics is big in climate, and economics is even bigger, and it does very much depend on where you're at in the economic cycle. I know that both here in New Zealand but also internationally, when the world has been in a high growth phase, it's been easier to push climate investment and also to have leadership from companies around taking steps to decarbonise their businesses or transition to new fuels or technologies. And it's been easier for governments to mobilise public capital in behind those sorts of transitions. Since COVID hit, it's been a lot harder, and obviously the high inflationary environment the world has been dealing with, and now increasingly the unstable geopolitical environment, cost of fuel, etc., makes it very, very hard for governments to impose carbon taxes or emissions trading scheme pricing, and also are more fiscally constrained about what they can invest in. And I think this is going to be one of our bigger challenges over the remainder of this century around climate action.
Yeah.
We know that the disruption that climate change will bring to food production, water security, will have on global economic stability will be inflationary in of itself. And so that will put strains on households, on government finances, and make climate action in some respects even harder. It may be that the best window we ever had was the last 40 or 50 years, and it is going to be harder. On the other hand, the physical effects of climate change bearing down on households and communities and ultimately onto nation states will incentivise more action, encourage more action by political leaders, because people will demand it. The question, I guess, becomes whether that's one of kind of hopeless despair and the world gives up, or whether we press on and we make the bold decisions we need to get our emissions under control and start sequestering more carbon dioxide back into the earth.
Absolutely. Spending so much time in Pakistan and seeing climate impact so closely, you're talking about climate change having impact on households and on food production and on even national infrastructure, the crucial infrastructure that the whole country depends on, or nations depend on in plural. Um, every year now, Pakistan has started to face such issues. In 2022, about 10 million people got displaced. Thousands of people died, and now this is a very easy, easily an annual event for Pakistan.
Yes.
Monsoons are starting, I think, in 1 or 2 months, and that's when we're now expecting again, with close to no real work on ground. Maybe on papers, yes, the governments and the policymakers might have worked. And again, not criticizing any government, whether that's Pakistan or any other government, but just a question as a person running a business in this industry, trying to solve the problem, or as a citizen, how can climate impact actually be more incentivized when we know that climate-based businesses are actually profitable in the short term and the long term? um, Whether that's creating a business that's creating levees and then covering them up with natural uh, solutions. So uh, putting in plants that actually hold the soil in place, and not putting concrete over there that deteriorates. There's many solutions out there. We see many university graduates work studying in environment. But for some reason, I'm very young and you're way more experienced than me. I would like your take on this. Where is the missing piece in this whole puzzle where we have the solution? It makes sense. It's cheap. It's going to get more economic opportunity. And in Pakistan, in a country like Pakistan, where we have actually adapted to climate-based solutions, Pakistan is now a country where the grid has a problem. We have more solar panels than and more capacity produced by solar panels than the grid itself. So no one's buying from the grid anymore. And I don't think this has been done in any other country in the world, where now this is where the issue is. And even during this war situation, Pakistan's energy crisis was not as bad as many other countries.
It's a fantastic example of where I think the democratization of energy production through solar is making a big difference, and there is uptake happening across, particularly the developing world, which is leapfrogging the development paths that many other countries went along. So I find that enormously encouraging, but it doesn't stop, of course, the biophysical effects what Pakistan has been through and continues to go through. So there's in my country, in New Zealand, the indigenous Maori people have a philosophy that we walk into the future walking backwards. We walk into history walking backwards, and the view is that we understand the future through understanding our past. There's some deep wisdom in that, but I also think one of the challenges for human beings is that we tend to conceive of the future through our understanding of what we know and what we've already lived through. So I think in the minds of decision makers, whether they be individual citizens casting a vote at the ballot box, or whether it be a government minister, or whether it be a CEO in a company, we do tend to discount our kind of our perhaps more negative or our worst fears about the future by reassuring ourselves about the world that we know. And I think as a consequence, we are underestimating the rate of change that's occurring. And I think the science is demonstrating that the rate of change is moving faster than anticipated. And I think human beings struggle to imagine a future that's very different to what they know. So I think part of our challenge is helping to describe what's at stake, helping people to understand the urgency and the need to take action now, because while there might be costs that need to be borne or investments that need to be made now to mitigate the effects of climate, they will only be more expensive in the future. And the cost of inaction, we know, is much greater than the steps we take today. So it's building that case for investment now. And I think the sorts of areas you touched on around reforesting lands that restore landscape integrity, particularly around things like soil structure, the co-benefits of those, not only for carbon sequestration, but for climate adaptation, increasing the rate of infiltration of water into soils, what that means for water security, what that means for biodiversity, all of those things. It really is about ecosystem integrity and landscape integrity. And that's where I think the opportunity to invest back into whole ecosystems that provide all of the ecosystem services and benefits that we need, that are also much more resilient to climate change, is where the real payoff comes. So that's the sort of investment that I know that you're talking about in your business, which is not just monocultural exotic trees for fast carbon sequestration. It is about restoring ecosystem function and performance so that all of the ecosystem services can be delivered. And I think that's where I think the win-wins are for mitigation, adaptation together, and also to help with biodiversity and food security, water security, all of those sort of things. They all come together in place, and they all come together with good science underpinning investing in the right sort of restoration activity. Often it's going to take longer, it might be more labour intensive than simply planting a monoculture, but the economic and the social and environmental benefits many fold greater. So I think it's really about understanding that return on investment in its fullest sense and accounting for it.
That is absolutely true. And totally agree with you on your angle with um, tackling such climate issues, and um, really happy to see that other policymakers uh, are also focusing on such issues. Where do you see the biggest commercial opportunities in climate right now, where now you used to be in the ministry, you're working with a business that is actually working on policy still, and you guys must be working on commercial angles as well. Um, just to understand, what are the sectors you see, whether that's forestry or energy, data, agriculture, what are some undervalued um, areas you see?
I do think it's in the landscape restoration we were talking about before. I do certainly in the New Zealand experience, we get an awful lot of the work done for us by nature. The more help we give nature to get started, if you like. And many of our restoration exercises as a country amaze people that after a small amount of effort, that many years later, that nature takes over and does the seed dispersal, does the propagation, and does the ongoing restoration work for us. So I do think that it's the just getting started in terms of landscape restoration. We could be doing more with those multifunctional benefits for water quality and biodiversity. I also think that there's a lot of opportunity in emerging technologies around natural hydrogen sources, and also in using our geological formations for sequestering and storing emissions. I think if we accept the fact that we are in transition and that we're going to continue to emit CO2 for steel production, aluminium production, for a range of cement and a range of things that we need in our industrial economy, it's going to be a long while before we can fully electrify our entire energy needs. And so we need to be investing in getting the carbon that's currently being emitted out of the atmosphere, as well as sequestering it through biological means, and also through things like soil restoration and enhancement, biochar, those sort of technologies. So I think that while there's obviously a lot of work happening around energy transitions, and particularly with the current fuel crisis, people are focused on alternative electricity generation, electrification of transport. All those things are necessary, and we've got to continue accelerating the uptake of those technologies. But where I think we're kind of underinvesting at the moment is in getting CO2 out of the atmosphere. We've already got too much CO2 and other greenhouse gases in our environment, in our atmosphere, than is healthy or sustainable for the planet over the longer term. So we can't waste time in getting that out as well. So those sort of efforts, I think, in parallel with decarbonisation, is where we could do more.
Absolutely. Lastly, but not least, I just have to ask one last question. Since we are in business of working with large capital and facilitating with redirecting it in the right space, if you had to direct $10 million into climate solution today, where would you put it and why?
I think I'd put it into ecosystem restoration, and I'd put it into understanding where those leverage points are for the most minimal intervention by humans that unlocks the power of natural forces and processes to continue the restoration effort. We've got to work with nature, and nature has enormous flows of energy through it. It has enormous adaptive capacity, and has, over hundreds of millions of years, refined its capabilities to do things that humans still can't even emulate. So I do think that that's where our maximum leverage point is, and just understanding where placing $1 today will unlock tens or hundreds of dollars of natural capital accumulation and ecosystem service is where we can have the real payoff. So that's where I'll be putting my 10 million.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I could ask you questions all night and all day. But it's really an honor to be hosting you. I would love to stay in touch and again ask you more questions later on. But thank you from the bottom of my heart, from Trillion Trees and people working in climate impact. I think this journey and this conversation would help a lot of individuals to also start working in the climate market, because I think this has put in an example where people would be now more interested in following such careers. Again, thank you so much, and really looking forward to staying in touch more.
Thanks, Saad. Keep in touch, and all the best for the Trillion Trees Initiative.
Thank you so much.
Okay then.